everyone, and welcome. So, today I am joined by Steve and Talylor to discuss Priest of Bones, the first book in the War for the Rose Throne by Peter McLean. I think it's pronounced Peter McLean. And this is a grimdark series. So, we are going to talk full spoilers. If you haven't read the book, don't watch, read it, and come back. But before we start, I'm just going to quickly let everybody introduce themselves, and then we can jump in and tell everybody how we like the book.
Cool. Do you want to go first, Taylor?
Okay. Hi, I'm Talylor. I am from the BookTube channel Made Between the Pages, as you can see below. I believe it's in the title, the name that I put there. So I do BookTube content that goes across a lot of genres, but I focus a lot on fantasy. So Yulene and I have really similar tastes. Then I have also been on Steve's channel quite a few times doing lives, so you might have seen me there as well. But I'm excited to be chatting about this book. You want to go next, Steve?
Sure. I'm Steve from Steve Talks Books, and we were just talking before. We've done this quite a few times, but it's always great to chat about these books and kind of get different perspectives. And I always walk away with a different perspective on whatever it is we're reading or absorbed. So I usually read grimdark and horror, but lately it's been lots of grimdark, just because it's been my thing lately. But this was my first grimdark book that I read last year, so I'm excited to I reread it, and then we're going to be reading the rest of the series. So I'm looking forward to it, and then we'll be reading the last book shortly after its release. So thank you, Yulene, for hosting.
Yeah, well, I think that the last one gets released in July, around that time.
I think so, yeah.
So that's actually perfect timing if that happens.
Yeah.
So just in general, how did you two like the book? Well, I know, Steve, for you it was a reread. Did you like it as much upon reread?
Yeah, I think now that I've watched Peaky Blinders, I had a different perspective on it a little bit, because it didn't really strike me. I didn't watch Peaky Blinders before I read it the first time, but I do see some of the similarities now. But what I really like about this one is it's low fantasy, and it was short. So and there's lots of themes I'm sure we'll get into that I picked up on. So yeah, I did enjoy this one quite a bit.
Okay.
Yeah, so this was my first time reading it, and I mentioned before we went live that I read it quite quickly. So it's definitely compulsively readable is the phrase that I would use for it. I did enjoy it. I'm glad that Steve mentioned low fantasy, because I didn't do my due diligence before picking it up, but I was expecting a little more of a high fantasy feel from it when I picked it up at first, but I did end up enjoying it. In the end, I gave it a middle of the road 3 stars. I'm sure we'll get into details of things we liked and didn't like in themes, but overall it was definitely an enjoyable read. Enjoyable maybe isn't the right word, but it was a fast-paced read.
Yeah. I think I felt a little bit the same as you, Taylor. I really enjoyed it for how different it was than what I normally read, because I normally also read grimdark, but it's more medieval setting. This one felt a little bit more modern, maybe because I had watched Peaky Blinders before, so I really was imagining the exact same setting. And I always like it to have a bit more fantasy, a little bit more magic in my world. So maybe that's why, like when we have Billy the boy, those instances were the most interesting for me when we had that and we saw what he could do in the end. But because it's first person, you don't really see a lot. You're really following Thomas. So I don't know if both of you liked the first person narrative, or if you would have liked maybe multi POV a little bit more, or see a little bit more of those other characters.
I enjoyed the first person POV here in that it allowed us to have it. How do I word this? The mysterious aspects of the plot were more believable because it was first person, right? So I think if we got multiple POVs, it would have been harder to make some of those plot points surprising. So I really do think that the first person perspective helped with that. But the other thing that I felt was maybe a bit of a detriment is because it's first person, the narrative voice is very distinct. And I think near the end of the book, the author, I think McLean is it McLean how you pronounce it? Is that correct?
think it's
McLean,
McLean. I think
McLean. Okay. I think McLean really got into his vibe, like he kind of got into the flow of the character near the end of the book. But the beginning, the writing was a bit hard for me because the first person narrative was so, there were a lot of things that were repetitive, and that could have been a choice, to give the voice a specific character to it. But that was hard for me at the beginning. So there were pros and cons for me.
I enjoy the first person POV because I think we were getting into his head and what kind of his history was and what he's been through. I think that gave us a better insight into what his obviously his perspective, but the way that he saw the world and the way that the story unfolded. That I enjoyed just the single POV in this one. I think it fit the low fantasy kind of setting. Like there wasn't a ton of world building. It's more contained. So I think the single POV was enjoyable for me, and I enjoyed there was a lot of like PTSD themes in this one too. So I liked getting into his head with that too, and him and his brother and what the things that they've been through. And I did like the feeling of when they come back to their home, and after they've been out fighting for so long that it's not home anymore. So that was I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I also think that was well done. And Brandy did like the first person as well. And yes, it did add some humor at times. I also, in general, I just like first person because it's more subjective and you get really in the person's head. I don't know if I absolutely love Thomas, but the idea of you have a mob boss and he's definitely a criminal, but at the same time he does live by some sort of a moral code. I do find those types of characters interesting. So by being in his head, you understand more why he's doing things the way he's doing them. But at times, it also made it, you knew his plans or what he was going to do in the majority, not always, before he was doing them. Because he was thinking in his head, like, okay, I'm going to do this, and now I'm going to go to this person, and then this is going to happen. And then that happened. And I think that maybe in a couple of instances that was not the case, because then all of a sudden he said, like, I had one big surprise. And I do think that was a good choice of the author, because then even though you were in his head, he kept some things hidden.
Something I did really like about it was the kind of inception aspect of the first person perspective when it comes to, if you look at the beginning of the book, they have the character descriptions. And instead of that being an objective glossary of the characters you're going to meet, it's his descriptions of the characters. So you get his perspective. And actually, all of those descriptions are quotes from the book. So when I noticed that, I was like, that's a really nice touch. So you can see why that became the descriptor for that character, because you're seeing from his perspective how that kind of cemented that in the beginning of the book. And I really enjoyed that aspect of it. So I think that was a really fun play that the author did with the first person. But I do agree with what Steve said in that, the themes of PTSD here require you to get close to the person. And it's not just PTSD, but all forms of trauma. And discrimination against LGBTQI plus people, like that theme was unexpected for me. Like I didn't expect that to come up as much as it did, but the trauma that can come from that as well, that requires you really to know that character. So I think that was really well done. And it made those themes of trauma and PTSD really poignant, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I noted. I really liked the inclusion. And he did it in a very natural way. Like, these are just characters, like in normal world, that live among us. And I really liked that Thomas, in that aspect, was actually a good person. And then you see, like, the discrepancy between others, like with Bloody Anne. She came from a community where there was a leader who was so vile, and somehow she was chosen to be the leader in that community. And then you have Thomas, who is a mob boss almost, but in that regard, he's much better than that leader. So I like the inclusion in a lot of things. And actually, in the beginning, I was thinking this book isn't that dark, because Thomas in itself, he didn't really seem that affected by the war. And then as the story progresses, you see that that's actually not the case. That's almost the front, and he tries to believe it himself. But as the story progressed, definitely some dark themes came across.
Oh yeah.
I felt the same way. I was like, oh, what is it? People have trigger warnings everywhere for this. And I got to the end and I was like, oh, I get it now, you know? So, and I mean that in a good way. I think that was a good reveal. Like you said, it's part of the storytelling. You're supposed, you're in Thomas's head. So he's trying to block himself from it. So it makes sense you wouldn't know about it yet either. All of the actual things that happened to him. So yeah, I think that was a really good aspect of it. That slow build up to the actual horrors,
Yeah.
And you were mentioning characters. I think all the characters are very distinct. I knew none of them are just warrior 1, warrior 2, mage, whatever. They were all very distinct, and there wasn't a huge cast of characters, but you knew who was who all the time. I didn't have trouble keeping track of who was who and what their personalities were because you had kind of an introduction to each one of them. So I knew who all of them were for the most part, the important ones there.
Yeah, exactly. And I do think that that's something that's difficult to pull off if you have just one person POV, because you're never in those heads of these other characters. But somehow he did pull it off, and all of them felt not like cardboard characters. You could really see some of them had a history, some of them had a past. You could see why they acted the way they did. Thomas's brother, I think his name is Jochen, something like that. At the start, I thought that it was just the PTSD of war, which is already terrible in itself. But you could see that there was something between those two brothers. Like Thomas said the entire time, I owe him something, and I can never make that right. So you knew that something was coming, and I liked the build-up towards it, but I was not expecting it to be as dark as it was in the end.
Yeah, I figured out what the end reveal would be when we're going. Spoilers are fine, right?
Yeah.
You said that, yeah. Okay, so when Johann, if that's how you say his name, when he said "my own dad," and I was like, "No!" Like I that was the moment where I figured it out, and I was like, "Oh, this is. Are they actually going to do the close-up reveal of the abuse that he, went through?" And they did, and I was like, "Oh my god!" So, yeah, that was a moment that I think the author did really well, because if you were paying attention, you could kind of prepare yourself for it before it was on page. But
you had like little hints here and there, and then it was like, oh,
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And there were like a lot of times also that you knew that something was happening, but you didn't really go into detail because it's so fast paced. But then there are a couple of instances when he really goes into graphic detail. And those are like the moments that you just have to take a step back and just think about it. Especially when he saved those boys. He went into every room and all of them were just sitting and waiting and not really doing anything. And I was thinking the entire time, please let that be the case for all of them.
Yeah,
but then the last one, that was a very horrible moment. But I also think that he handled it in a very serene way, which is difficult. Because I think that sometimes authors can go almost too far or make it a cheap moment just for shock value. And I don't think that happened here.
I agree. And also I found after that scene, I saw Billy the boy as almost like a foil to that. So there was a situation where that someone tried to take advantage of him in that way, and he turned turns table. He was not having any of that, and became a force in and of himself. So I almost saw that as a foil, like him empowering another character. Unfortunately, coupled with trauma, but empowering a character that would have been in a similar situation, but got his own way out of it. So I almost saw that as different avenues that something like that can take.
That was one of the moments, actually. I don't know if you're talking about when they are still at war and Sir Elon, if that's his name, he tries to do something with Billy the boy. But
yeah, that's what I was talking about. So he basically tries to get in bed with this little boy, and the little boy is like, "Excuse me, sir, let me magic you and tell you why this is not happening." And I thought that was in my mind a foil for the characters we get later.
A
way to empower someone in the same situation.
I think that at that moment I actually didn't really like Thomas that much, and especially later on. I don't know if he was aware that was going to happen, or if he knew about that knight's tendencies. But if that's the case, and knowing what Thomas endured and his brother endured, and how angry he was when one of his men was hitting a prostitute, why didn't he stop the night while they were at war? Because if I knew that something like that was happening, it seemed like he didn't really do anything about it. On the other hand, like you said, Taylor, of course, Billy the boy could hold his own. He was very powerful, so maybe Thomas felt like he didn't need to intervene.
Mm-hmm.
But that was something that I kept thinking later on, like, why didn't anything happen there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's a bit of a different topic, but speaking of like character inconsistencies, or a character that didn't act in the way that I expected, was his aunt. So, like, I don't know, maybe because I read the beginning of it, the description of her was like she takes no shit or whatever, and she was like a soldier. But I wanted more of her on page. So when we first get back to his town, which I can't remember the name, it starts with an E right now, but when we first get back to his hometown and it's not home anymore, like you said, Steve, and he starts to take the steps to make it home again, she's big, you know, she's a big character and we see her a lot. But then I felt like she just kind of disappeared off the screen and came back every once in a while to yell at him for things that didn't really make sense. Like when she was upset with him when he went and butchered a bunch of the rival gang, butchered them, you know, I think when it was for the golden chain. After that battle, she's like, how dare you bring violence? I'm like, but that's like your brand. Like I was confused as to why. Maybe you guys had a different view on that, and I would like to hear it. But for me personally, her character kind of confused me by the end. I wasn't really sure.
I kind of took that as that she didn't want to cause any, or like draw attention to herself, or kind of rock the boat, I guess you can say, is she didn't want to disrupt the status quo, is what I took it as.
Yeah, it feels like she was afraid to lose control, almost, because he was gone from to the war for so long. And I also don't know how old he was exactly when he left, because it seemed like he had a pretty small gang at start. He only mentioned a couple of names. Of course, he did have multiple businesses. So I don't know how that came to be exactly, and how much violence that they needed to extort to make that happen. But yes, I also agree. It seems like she was meant to be like that older aunt who doesn't really take shit from anyone. But at the same time, I think that maybe different examples would have been better, or that sometimes she also could have said, like, what you did now was okay, and not only give him a hard time almost. But
yeah, I mean, he needs someone to check him, obviously. So I think that was part of what her purpose was. But when she was like, I don't know. I guess if she was going to have that important checking power, I wanted to see her more, I guess, is kind of what it boils down to. It felt like she just kind of popped in and said, you know, basically pick up your socks, you know, get your life together, and then disappeared again, you know.
yeah, exactly. Because at a certain point, she was living in her own home. And I guess that then it's perfectly normal that you don't see too much of her. But then after her home burns down, she's back at the crew, and she doesn't really say too much there either. But I think that for me, it also boils down to the story could have been a little bit longer, maybe. And I would have enjoyed it more fleshed out. I did appreciate that it was so fast paced and that it was a quick read. And that's nice intermezzo from all of the fantasy that we normally read. So it's nice. It's a perfect palate cleanser. But at the same time, it's not a book that I would say is an all-time favorite, just because it can be quite forgettable. Because it's so, and then I think that this was also mentioned, Thomas repeats a lot. And I can see that that's like first part of how the narration is going, and that gives him his own voice. But at the same time, I was thinking, you have 350 pages. Don't repeat everything 3 times, and use then that space for just diving deeper into other themes.
Yeah, at one point, I was counting, but I stopped counting how many times he said Bloody Anne was his second, because I was like, I'm going to lose my goddamn mind if I count how many times he says this. So again, I think it was a narrative structure thing. You're supposed to, like, he's thinking about this a lot because he's worried about his brother, and, you know, his brother's going to be upset that he makes her a second. Like, I get that it's big in his mind, but as a reader, I was like, please stop. Like with that particular phrase, you know? Yeah, that was a bit tough for me in the beginning. But like I said, at the end, it seemed to smooth out. I wasn't really having those moments so much near the end. I don't know. Like I said, if it was because the flow, kind of hit their stride, both the character and the author together. But the beginning, I felt that way.
And I did like that and he, now that I think about it, he did say pull the right levers a lot too. But I did enjoy that because he knew how to motivate people, and it was a kind of a leadership thing. Being in his position, he had to know how to motivate people and how to kind of manipulate, but put them in the right, set them on the right path to where they will do what he wants them to do, and not think about it too much. But I did enjoy that from the first person perspective too.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me, I don't know if you guys have read the Greenbone Saga, but it kind of reminds me of Hilo from the Greenbone Saga. So that's also like gang leaders. You follow 3 gang leaders. It's a family saga at its core, but one of the brothers is named Hilo, and he's like the people person, and he basically maneuvers people like chess pieces in the same way, basically pulling their right levers. And it really reminded me of him when I was reading that. But
And that one is
hard if you don't have that reference, I guess.
Or
yes, yeah, it's multiple POV. Yeah, not singular, but that specifically Hilo's POV and his character reminds me of Thomas in the way that he kind of gets to know people, gains their trust, and then slightly pushes them where he wants them to be. It's very, very similar.
Well, I got some similarities, even though it's completely different. But from the first law, and maybe it's because I was reading those 2 books at the same time, like Red Country and then this one, because he uses the same phrases sometimes, and he does that on purpose. It's clear that he does it, like choosing the right man for the right job, and especially towards the end of a chapter, that's like the sentence that you see a couple of times. And it reminded me of Joe Abercrombie, who also like has some certain taglines that he likes to throw in just for recognition. So I actually like that style of writing, and especially because this book was short enough that it didn't become too much. Like with Joe Abercrombie, sometimes it becomes too much. But here, for a short book, it was perfect.
Yeah. Repetition, Abercrombie is a pro at that. He repeats everything.
I haven't taken a crack at him yet, but I just got my Broken Binding book that I talked about on your channel, Steve.
Yes.
And I'm going to read, hopefully, First Law soon, so I'll prepare myself for repetition. I'll be ready.
It was good until like the last book in that trilogy, and then it's like, okay, like that's enough. That's itself. But yeah, I didn't even think of that, Yulene, until you mentioned that. It was similar to Abercrombie in that he the repetition.
But so Thomas, I think that both of you really like him as a character. Are there like secondary characters that you really enjoy that you want to see more of besides the aunt?
Oh man, I mean, I love Bloody Ann. I think you're supposed to, but that worked. I loved the crap out of her. And then when Rosie came to check on her after, I was like, yes, So I really enjoyed her. And I also really enjoyed Billy the Boy because he's so weird and I want to know more. Like, I just like how strange he is, and how I also like the discussion around him about what is the line between holy and like possessed, and when does it go from good viewed as good to viewed as evil. So I want to see more of him just for his character, but also for the discussion that was around him. And I also liked Fat Luca a lot because I'm a big fan of like spy, like smart characters. So I love like Locke from Locke Lamora, that kind of thing. So once he started doing his political intrigue, I became a lot more interested in his character.
Yeah, Bloody Ann. It's hard to not like Bloody. I think everyone has to like Bloody Ann, but I'm not sure what's going to happen to her in the series. I have no idea, but maybe she'll get a spinoff.
Yeah, that would be really nice. And I'd
really beat the hell out of that.
I really hope that Rosie is sincere, because when we find out that she is like, she's not a Queensman exactly, but at least she works for them. And we know that she needed to have like one way into the pious man, because she needed to have like a segue to talk to. I don't really know what was the name again of the actual queensman.
I'll say I don't know how to pronounce it. There was a lot of vowels in there.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you
But
know, Steve?
I'm not even gonna try. Yeah.
The one
we
that
all
started with
didn't
an
listen to
A.
the audiobook, so that's a problem. Normally, at least one of us has listened to the audiobook and we know how to pronounce it, but this time, but yeah, because we
We're
don't know,
floundering.
but because Rosie does need to have that connection with her, I'm guessing that she also needed to like have a kind of excuse to show up a lot. But I hope that her feelings are sincere, because Bloody Anne has been through too much to get betrayed.
Yeah.
That way.
Yeah. I feel very protective.
Exactly.
Do you recommend this
So,
book for beginners?
Hmm.
I would say speed-wise, yes. Theme-wise, no. Like if you're not used to grimdark, there's a lot of themes that I think you shouldn't run headlong into with this book. But pace-wise and writing-wise, for me personally, I'd say yes. I don't know about you guys, but
Yeah, I think if you're looking to get into grimdark, I think it's a good introduction to it. If you'll get the temperature pretty quick, whether or not it's the genre is for you or not for you from this one. At least that was the case for me anyway.
yeah, I do agree with that. And I think if you have watched the show Peaky Blinders, even though it does digress from it pretty quickly on, a lot of the themes that are being discussed you also see in that show. So if you're okay with those themes there, I think you will like this book as well. But if those went too far, then yeah, because there are definitely some graphic details here with children. Yeah, that can be very difficult to read for some people. So I wouldn't exactly call this grimdark light. Like Joe Abercrombie, I think is easier to get into, especially because he has a lot of humor, and that elevates a lot of it. But here, it does feel pretty dark at times. But like Taylor said, in terms of the difficulty of the story to follow, especially because it's first person and it's quite fast, it's not difficult to grasp what's going on. It just has some very dark themes.
yeah.
Yeah. This is. I don't think. Yeah, I'm not sure. This. I think this is grim darkier than First Lies. I would say.
Grimdarkier.
Darkier.
I like
You can
that.
come up with a scale.
I'm adding that to my lexicon.
Yeah, we're gonna have to add that to the vocabulary.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, I don't know. So those are the characters that I liked. I didn't want to cut you guys off on the character thing. I think, kind of went off on a tangent about Bloody Anne there. But what about you guys? What were the characters that you liked?
I think that I really liked Fat Luca as well, just because he's quite funny at times, but he has more to him than you think at start. And that was maybe I had so many interesting side characters that I was thinking I think I would have liked the story more from their POV, like from Billy the Kid, or from especially Billy the Kid, because he goes to different places. I think that sometimes for me, it felt like we were almost the entire time at the same spot. We meet the same people, the same things are happening. While if we would have followed Billy the Kid for Billy the Kid, it's not Billy the Kid, it's Billy the Boy. If we followed him for a while, I think we would have maybe seen a more diverse cast of characters. But at the same time, it is kind of a compliment that the secondary characters are so good and so well developed. I think that his brother was also a very interesting character to follow, because in the beginning, I didn't really like him that much. He was very loud. He was very obtrusive. He didn't really care for anyone, it seemed. But then again, as the story progressed, you saw that there was more to him.
I think, we discussed earlier about how the ideas of trauma require character understanding. So I think seeing all of that erratic behavior from Thomas's brother was important to understand, like, the effect that the trauma you find out about later with his dad, like how that had an effect on him. You go retroactively and you think, okay, like this is starting to make sense. So I think you're not supposed to like him in the beginning, because I felt the same way. Like, this is erratic and weird. What's going on here? And then the retroactive kind of moment. I I think was well done. But yeah, he's a very, very dynamic character. Whenever he's on screen, something's gonna happen. Whenever he's on page, I mean, not screen. But,
Yeah. Bloody Animal is probably this standout, I think, for everyone. Yeah. Is Thomas a likable character? I kind of thought of him as like a mob boss from a gangster movie that you don't want to like him, but you do. Like, you start to root for him, but it becomes the best of the worst, or at least the one character that you feel closest to in that in that regard. So I don't know if you're supposed to really like Thomas. I think it's just, you just become attached to him through, from learning about him and what he's doing. So, but I think it's just one bad person replacing another. It's just this endless cycle.
Yeah, exactly. And I actually also really liked him, but part of it is because you are in his head and you see why he does certain things. And even though you might not agree with it, of course, this is not like an extremely civilized world. Like, there is corruption in a very high scale, like everywhere around him. So I almost feel like he's the best choice for the people that are there. Because if he doesn't do it, others will do it. And you can see that he's fair to his own people. Like, when the bakery burns down, he tells that man, like, I'm going to take care of it, and you are going to have a new business. And when I was reading that, he said something like, the people need to pay taxes. It's a closed system. They have to do it. They have no choice. But if they do it, they get protection and they have the security. And I was almost thinking, like, it's not really different than what we're doing right now. I have to pay taxes. I don't choose that. But if I do it, I have healthcare and I have all of those things. So, of course, he chooses a very dark path to get there. But why he's doing it, to protect his people, I could kind of stand behind that.
I did like the discussion of gray characters. I've talked about this a lot when we talk about gunmetal gods and stuff on Steve's channel, but this is like my catchphrase at this point. But gray characters make you reflect on your own morality. And I do think that was something really well done with Thomas, because I also felt like, okay, well, is there a better alternative? Not really. Is it good? No. But something else, when you mentioned the bakery, that I want to ask if you guys picked up on, or if I'm just reading too far into this, but I thought it was really interesting that when he destroyed, when he destroyed the gut cutter's territory, the wheels, it specifically singles out a bakery. It says, this is a bakery that is, pays taxes to this person. And that's the first place that Billy the boy sets on fire. And the baker, he specifically says, you can hear the family trying to get out. And he says, well, that's just the price you pay in war. But then when someone attacks his area, they again single out a bakery. And he's like, oh, thank God the family's out safe, and that's and I'm going to pay you back. And that really stuck out to me as maybe they're trying to show the hypocrisy here. The fact that you single out the exact same store. I don't know if you guys thought the same thing.
Yeah, I actually noticed it as well, because he says something when, like, his people are attacked. These people didn't do anything wrong. And I was thinking, well, like 5 pages before, you said this is the price of war. And yes, these people are innocent, but they're not under my protection. So it's not my problem. And so, yes, I do think that that's a way of saying, like, Thomas isn't all holy and he just cares for his own people. Part of it is also because that's his money. But if they don't fall under his protection, he doesn't really care.
I didn't even pick up on that. Yeah, it's good. Did catch that one? I like Super Dark.
So I like Super Dark.
I don't think the language is hard at all. No. Really easy to blow through, in my opinion.
But I will say, if you plan to read it, don't continue watching, because we're just going to spoil everything for you.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We've already spoiled quite a bit, so.
Yeah, and you can definitely still join, because I read this book in a couple of days. So we are going to read Priest of Lies, the second book, in May, but you can definitely read both of them in May and be right on time. But don't continue watching. And if you like dark stuff and an easygoing read, I would recommend this one. It's not exactly the same, but like the pacing is the same as Prince of Thorns by Mark Lawrence, if you read that one. So if you like that fast pace, like gory stuff sometimes, then I think that this one you will like as well. Oh, okay. That's easy. Elsa. Okay.
Elsa, all right. Remember that one.
Oh, cool. I'm not alone.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Well, I actually had a question for you guys, which is when I was reading it, so the name is Priest of Bones, yes? So the idea of him being a priest, I thought was going to be a bigger aspect of this book, and it may be. It may have more effect, later in the series, because I know that name style continues. But it was kind of more prevalent in the beginning, and I liked the discussions of the needs of wartime priesthood being different from like usual priesthood. And I did like that discussion. I also thought it was quite convenient that like all of his crew confesses their crimes to him like regularly. Like that's pretty easy to figure out who's lying about what. That's convenient. But I wondered if you guys kind of had the same feeling where you thought it was going to be a bigger theme, and then in my opinion it didn't play as big of a role as I would have thought because it was in the title. But I wonder if you guys had the same feelings or if you thought that was just an interesting side plot. What did you guys think?
Yulian, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I didn't even think about it that way, but looking back, yeah, I would have liked to see more because I didn't even see him as a priest as the story progressed. I saw him as a mob boss, and then sometimes you had like those small instances that you could see, like, oh, yes, he's a holy man, which didn't really play a big part. I think if that wasn't the case, the story would have gone more or less the same. So it's like a very interesting feature that I would like to see more of. And in general, religion, because they are followers of the lady, but we do know that there are other gods as well. And I would like to see that come to play because I really like religion in books in general. So when I saw the title Priest of Bones, I was thinking, yes, something is going to happen here, maybe more towards the occult, especially when you then saw Billy the Boy. And like, is it magic? Is it just a cunning man? Or is it a witch? And what's the difference between them? So I thought that that was going to tie into the religion. And then it didn't really. So maybe we will see more of that in the future. And that's also what I mean with it could have been 100 pages longer and then have some more of that world building, maybe, because we don't really see a lot of that.
Yeah, I didn't even think of it that way until you mentioned it. But yeah, I think maybe I'm hoping later in the series it'll play a bigger part. But I did like the way the title played into the story with he's a priest. This is like this never ending. And there was even some parts when there's one moment where they're going into battle again, and it's just like it's like it never ends, and they're stuck in this endless cycle of just battles and violence and fighting for territory or whatever it is. And that kind of struck me as it's like they can't get out, like they can't escape. There's no way out. So.
Yeah, I agree. It was definitely pretty bleak in that regard. And especially the first half, I felt like that was going on and on. Like they were trying to get their territory back. And I at least didn't really know what was going on, who was behind this. But then you do get mentions of those Scadians and that they are a very big threat for the entire country. So it seems like those people have a lot more magicians, or at least they are using them a lot more in this war. And maybe when this really comes at a head, we will see more of that in the next couple of books. And I think that maybe Thomas then will do more research also to understand what's happening and what he can use against them. So that's like my hope for the next books, that we see some more, because those Scadians were more interesting to me as like the other side than the other gangs. Well, we have only one, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think he has a lot of world building that he can play with, with those outside forces. Yeah.
I almost forgot. Yeah.
Yeah, we have to do a confessional real quick,
I almost thought it was kind of like a joke, almost like it was like kind of like a wink and a nod, like, yeah, I'm a priest. Like, kind of, yeah. I don't know if it was for legit.
Yeah, and it's also said, like in a flashback or something like that, he explains to the reader that the priest died and it wasn't that difficult to become the new priest. So why not do it? It's not like he has a lot of faith. He's just doing that because that's something that needs doing.
Yeah, but something that I noticed, which was interesting, and again, could be reading too far into it, but when like Bloody Ann tells her story and things like that, it created a space for the catharsis of sharing a story. So it didn't really have a religious overtone or even undertone to it. In my opinion, it was just expressing what I got from that scene where everyone confesses to him, besides being able to, get all the secrets of his crew. It highlighted the importance of the catharsis of letting out something, right? So if
Mhm.
you're just sitting there with those feelings and feeling them forever and holding them in, that's not healthy. So you see growth in Bloody Ann's character, not in Simple Sam, because, well, that's in his name, and if he peed in someone's beer, that is what it is, but I think it showed that catharsis can bring growth in a sense. So it didn't feel overtly religious to me per se. It was just a space where people felt safe to say something, which I did like.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, I agree with that. I actually also liked Thomas and Bloody Ann's relationship because even though he keeps saying like I don't trust her or I need to use her for the best job, in the end he really does care for her. And so I liked seeing that and how he was really he wasn't doing well when he heard that story. It hit him. And so I really enjoyed that. And at the other hand, I was also thinking it's actually strange how we can carry like that burden with us for such a long time. And then when somebody says you're forgiven, that's like a weight off your shoulders while they don't really have that power, but we're giving it to him. So Thomas actually has a lot of power in his group because he's that priest. And do a lot of them believe him? Really? Do they really see him as something more? Or is it just a way of at least telling your secrets to someone and knowing that they're safe?
that's interesting too. Yeah, I mean, well, something we were talking about what we hoped for the future and like world building and stuff. And I really hope that he plays with the idea of different religions. So, in our discussions of gunmetal gods and stuff, I talked about how I love merciless gods. I could read that all day, every day. But I also really enjoy discussions of religion as societal structures that are not just actual praise of a deity, but a societal structure that imposes their beliefs on the populace or controls money, controls politics. I really like stories that engage with that. And it's even more interesting when you have multiple deities. So it's specifically said in this book many times, the temple of all gods. And he specifically mentions many times, we follow this god, this person follows this god. And I really hope in the later books we get more of an exploration of that and how those different religions or things might coexist together, or if they have any ripple effects in society. Because what's really interesting to me, just in my personal life, is I my home country is America, and religion matters a lot there, to the point where like don't bring it up at the dinner table with certain people. But now I live in Japan, and people here do not care. There, no one cares. And honestly, the daily religion people practice is a combination of Shintoism, Buddhism, and people don't really know which is which, and they don't really mind not knowing. So I personally, in my life, have gone through two different environments with that, and I'm just really interested to see how McLean, I really had to think about that, bless my heart, would tackle this in later books, because I find it just a really fascinating subject, personally.
I think Gunmetal God spoiled us on that one. The religion on that one.
Okay, so
That's true. Maybe I'm putting expectations that aren't right, but
well, Gunmetal Gods is the one from
Samil?
I yes, okay. Yeah, I recently heard a lot more about it because I know that Steve and, well, Taylor as well, you guys really enjoyed that entire series, I think. And you recently read the novella? Is that the same series?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're going to
yeah,
meet on that. Just haven't found a date yet. But
yeah,
I have
it's happening.
so but
So,
I have to block up a
oh,
day to discuss novella with that crew, the Avengers.
Yeah, assemble. But yeah, we'll be talking about that. But I guess maybe I've just been reading a lot of books about that kind of theme, and this book felt like it was hinting at it.
yeah.
So I have my hopes for what I hope to see, but I shouldn't expect too much, because I think, as Steve mentioned earlier, it is low fantasy, so I should keep that in mind as well. But I don't know. I always love those themes in books. books.
Yeah, same. It makes the world also feel more fleshed out and just realistic in general, because this is something that you have in each culture. So of course you will have it there as well. And it seems like everybody is living together quite peacefully. But I think if the Scadians, I think that they will be a bigger threat later on as well. And maybe they do need to coexist at some point. We don't really know what their religion is. So I hope that we see more of that, a clash or trying to coexist together. But I'm also a sucker for religion in fantasy books. So yeah, I was hoping the same thing. And maybe we see more of that. I actually don't know if the second and the third book are as short as this one, or if they're significantly longer.
Seems like we might actually get the answer.
With an answer.
It's 350 pages.
Okay, so
Sounds about the same then.
yeah, similar.
Yeah.
Yeah, not too bad. And speaking of fantasy, when the magic system does appear, when stuff goes down, I thought that was really really cool. I like that it was quick and it was effective on the magic part of it.
Yeah, I agree. I also liked that these magicians are very powerful, but you can kill them just like any other man. So if they don't watch out, it's not like, oh, you have a magician, yeah, you can do whatever. Which is sometimes when you have a soft magic system, you just know that in the end everything is going to be fine because that party has a magician. So I like that from the get-go you saw these can be killed just as easily as any man as long as you are able to sneak up to them. But Billy the Kid is something else, it seems. So I want to see what he is exactly.
I definitely agree with that. But I have a theory. So when Cutter killed the magician from the, you just said the name of the group, it's Scandians?
I think Scadians, but I don't know.
Clearly we need to do work before this next discussion because this is disgraceful. But when Cutter killed that magician and it was described as like a big rat scuttling up the wall, I'm like, oh, magic. Other types of magic, is what I was thinking. Because when Bloody Rose threw her knife, it was deflected away. But somehow he was able to get close enough to get his little knives in there. So that kind of got my brain, moving, as in maybe there's different forms of magic. I really enjoyed that as well. It was very tantalizing, quick, and, kind of brutal when it was spotted in there, but very effective.
Exactly. Now, because Esme says like some have very dark pasts, and we have talked a little bit about this, but I immediately also thought about Aunt Adida, because, well, in the beginning, she seems like a very nice lady. Like the aunt, she's nice. There's nothing really wrong with her. Yes, she's a mob boss, but she has like her family almost. But then you do discover some dark things about her. And in a way, I like that. In a way, I don't know if I do, because it seems to immediately vilify the other party and almost make it okay what Thomas is doing, because look at what they're doing. And with Thomas, we don't really see those dark things in his past or what he's doing currently. So I don't know if I like that everybody else was horrible, and then he was the only righteous boss almost.
Oh, you mean the Mom Aditi or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Yeah. The same thing too. It seemed almost to make it justified in him killing her. Like, this is a good reason why you shouldn't be sad that she's dead.
Yeah.
I agree with that. It could also be from the first person perspective. We'll learn later, that he's just as bad. But I do admit that in the contents of this book, it seemed like very clear who you were supposed to like.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. I didn't even think about that. He is, because he says a couple of times, as I wrote earlier. So it seems like he's writing down his memoirs almost. Maybe he's choosing what he wants to share. And of course, he's not going to share what he's doing wrong the entire time. So yeah, I didn't even think about it like that.
It doesn't change the experience of the first book as a unit, but I do think that could possibly be a reveal in the future. Yes. Okay. Everything. I love everything about this comment. The Grace of Kings. If I know Yolene recently read it, but if you like fantasy that has, religious themes, well, all the themes really, but Grace of Kings does that fantastically.
I agree.
Yeah.
And the second book is even better. So
God tier. All right. I don't want to derail the conversation to a different book, but for me, Wall of Storms is God tier.
agree.
I'm going to pressure you, Steve, until you pick it up.
Yeah, it's already on my list after Yolene and Jimmy had talked about it. So yeah. Whenever Yolene tells me you'll like this, I'm like, okay, I'll buy it.
I try to be fair, Steve.
Actually, I was just talking to my husband Hayata the other day, and he was like, I've noticed two things. One, you buy more since being on BookTube, but two, you like everything that you buy. And I was like, yeah, I follow the right people. You find people who have the same taste, or that even if I follow someone who hates a book, I'm like, oh, then I'm gonna love it. So you really start to learn how to change your buying habits to make them more worthwhile. I think BookTube really helps with that.
Definitely.
Yeah, I agree. Well, perfect.
Oh my God, you're gonna have to message me, Esme. I want to hear all about it.
Well, I was actually going to say something about this book, but now I completely forgot.
Oh man. I did highlight, look at me all prepared, but I did highlight a couple of things in the book. Hold on, let me find where I was reading this. So like I said, some of the writing was not my all-time favorite, but I did highlight, let's see if I can find it. Okay, there was one quote on page 310 that I highlighted that because I happened to read this actually on my computer for the first time. It was a very strange experience, but what I highlighted was when people have run out of food and hope and places to hide, do not be surprised if they have also run out of mercy. And that was when the mob essentially attacked and destroyed the gut cutters when they were taking revenge on Thomas's crew for destroying their whole area, for burning everything down. They were taking revenge, and then the people in that area attacked the last soldiers, and Thomas didn't have to do anything because it was like mob justice. And I thought that quote really stuck out to me because, I mean, when you're backed into a corner, if you've got nothing left, I just thought it was very poetically written.
And that's actually what grimdark is all about. Like, this is the reality of war, and when that happens, you're not going to care that much about morals, and you're not going to think about it objectively and be compassionate because nobody was that for you. So I really like that actually, and it really fits this story as well.
Yeah, I mean, not to say Thomas put them in that situation. The revenge was coming because of his actions, but hey, they got their justice in that way. And I think there was.
I also think there is one instance. Well, there are multiple, but one that even in this setting, I couldn't really understand what Thomas was doing, because at one point he has somebody in the other crew, kind of like a spy, but he doesn't tell them that something is happening because they have his children, they have his entire family. And in a way, I understand that there have to be repercussions. If you're a mob boss and somebody treats you like that, you have to do something. But at the same time, I was thinking, well, in the beginning, you let them go. And here, there was no compassion left. And maybe that's just the heat of the moment kind of thing. But I would have thought that Thomas would have understood what that guy was doing and why he couldn't really tell what was happening.
Yeah, I found that to be a little inconsistent myself as well, just because I don't know. I thought he was going to like chop off his legs or something. I thought that was, and just leave him crippled. and I know it was like for Bloody Ann's sake, maybe saying that, you know, I've taken revenge for the man who could have killed the person you love, but it seemed a couple steps ahead, not an immediate reaction. So yeah, that part confused me a little bit too. Like, oh, okay, well, off goes his head then. I wasn't really expecting that, but
Exactly.
I did have. Oh, we can do comments first. Let's do that first.
That quote seems to contrast with religious themes you guys spoke of. What is a lack of mercy but a sign of absence in faith conviction? And I actually think if you read this book that you will understand, because the religion is not like religion in this world almost. It's almost just like a culture thing, it's tradition. But do they really believe that their gods are merciful? I don't think so, because they literally say something like, Our Lady doesn't heal people. And if you do something bad, you will always get forgiveness. While I think even in our structure, in our religion, if you do something that's like extremely illegal, you will not be forgiven by a priest. I don't know. I'm not an expert, to be honest. But like Thomas, he forgave everybody. You just had to tell your sins, and that was it. The lady forgives you, and you can move on. So it seems like a very depressing religion almost. One that actually helps you if you're the bad guy, and not if you're somebody who actually needs help.
I kind of saw parallels to Catholicism. Is that what you're going to say, Taylor? Is that?
No, take it away, Steve. I'll go after you.
No, just I was thinking with Catholicism, you go and you confess and you're good. So that's kind of what the parallels I saw to that religion in the book. I'm not sure if that was intentional or not, but that's kind of what I picked up on. Just like you confess and okay.
I picked up on that as well. But I do think that they make it very clear, and I guess I wasn't clear when I talked about the religion earlier either, but like the only job of this god, not job, but the only thing she guarantees, or doesn't even guarantee actually. I don't know the words to describe this, but the only thing that God does is maybe not kill you that day. Like she can't make it so you don't die, but by her mercy, maybe you live, kind of is the vibe. So, but she's not going to do anything to help you live. So I think that was a really good comment, because I think it showed that we didn't explain that well enough. But I think in the world, it is pretty consistent, because it's not a merciful religion in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, and I think, Steve, if you read Red Country and there's like one character who has almost the same view towards God, he's like, everybody thinks that God is merciful. Why would he be? He's just the guy who's in charge. He doesn't be a good guy per se. So I almost feel like it's the same here. We have very powerful deities, but that doesn't mean that they're good per se. It doesn't mean that they really care about you that much. You just need to pay tribute and worship them. And then maybe, Taylor, like you said, she's not going to kill you, but she's not going to heal you. And nowhere is it implied that she can't do that. She just won't interfere. So, yeah.
Yep. Just before I forget, I had one last quote that I highlighted. It was more in the beginning on page 196. It says, just remember that no plan survives first contact with the enemy. And I love that quote, because I think a lot of fantasies have a version of that, like it's all going to go to shit when we get there anyway, or something like that. But that was a very poetic way to put that. I really liked that a lot.
Yeah, exactly. And you also see that a couple of times, that Thomas is like saying towards his generals, let's do that we did during the war, and then it will work out. And then something happens that they can't do it that way, or that they are overwhelmed, or they didn't really take in all the factors. And I like how that's unpredictable. Because like I said in the beginning, sometimes first person, you know everything that's going to happen up front, but then you have a curveball and the whole plan goes to shit.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of real life, isn't it? It's just daily life. You think you know it's going to happen, and then it just doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
I agree with that. I definitely agree with that. I wouldn't put cowardice and a hyper self-preservation on the same level, but I would still say that it definitely comes from a lack of another option.
Yeah,
I either die or I do this. you know?
Yeah, and that also, I agree with the comment, but then if that's true, I think most of us would be cowards. It's like when we look back in history, all of us think that we would be the heroes. But book three shows us that the majority of us wouldn't be. All of us would probably be cowards, and then you have like one or two exceptional people, and we would all wish that we are that, but we don't really know.
It's a really good comment, actually. I really like the way you said that. And it's something, this is, again, a little off topic, but if you hear a lot of the discourse about modern day movies and why a lot of people are saying that maybe they don't feel so inspired by modern day movies, what a lot of people have been saying, you know, I say what a lot of people have been saying, but I mean commentators online and things like that, is that a lot of characters are born with these abilities. They're like special from the beginning. And so it's hard as someone who's trying to connect to the characters to do a self-insert or think maybe I can connect to this person, you know, because like you said, a lot of us are just normal people. Or if we're in a situation like that, we don't have the special powers too, or the super fighting powers to get out of a situation. So I do think that maybe that quote stuck out to me because of its relatability, you know?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we haven't really touched upon Elsa that much, but did you guys like that we have like a bigger plot and that Thomas is actually not really in control of what he's going to do and he really needs to play it smart because some of these actions that he needs to do are not really in character and he knows that some people are going to notice that and are going to ask questions, but he just has to go with it.
Yeah, I really liked how he was aware of that and made decisions to hide that. That was one of my favorite political aspects of this, that he was aware, self-aware of that. But I do think, considering it was more of a low fantasy, I was very dissatisfied with that aspect of the book because it seemed like just pulling solutions out of a hat. You know, if you can make her happy, she can make XYZ happen for you. So it felt a little too easy at points to have someone who had access to those things. But I do like the idea of a larger force influencing like this small microcosm, because I think it reminded you that this microcosm we're existing in is because it's a first person perspective, but there's more to this world and more that we should be thinking about. And I did like that. I guess wanted more of it to make it more believable.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't like the larger for not being in control until the very end. Then it kind of made a little bit more sense, but I wasn't as bothered by it. But I do agree with you, Taylor. I think you needed that bigger picture because it was a little too contained. If there wasn't something else influencing what was happening, then it would feel a little too narrow. You needed something to, and I'm sure it'll come into play later in the series. But yeah, you needed something to kind of pull out of that little area that they're in.
Yeah, I agree. And I'll
be right back. Please continue, but I'll be right back.
No, I was just saying that I do think that we will be seeing more of that because now Thomas is going to, be present in higher circles, it seems. Now he's married. I didn't really understand why he needed to get married, but it's probably just to have her at the same place as he when he is in those higher circles because she knows what's going on and she can also keep a check on him. But if that's happening, then he will probably also see the people who are behind Elsa and who are really in control. Because in the end, she is extremely skilled, but I don't think that she's making all of the decisions. It's somebody that's even higher on top. Yeah. So maybe we will see more in the next books.
Yeah, I agree. I think, and another. I took it as another way for them to keep tabs on him and to, still be in control of him.
Yeah, exactly. So yes, I like how dark stories are willing to take on the tough philosophical, psychological aspects of the human condition. And this is why I personally like grimdark. I know that we need to maybe have a conversation about grimdark some other time, but it seems like that's where it's really highlighted. And then especially if people do surprise you from time to time, because Thomas did do some really good things in this book as well, where he really helped people, even though his own life was at stake. Towards the end, Elsa tells him, like, you're now the boss. You can't go to the fights. It's too dangerous. You need to like stay safe and behind. But he doesn't listen when his own people are targeted. So it shows you that sometimes, even though he is not the best person, he does do some good things as well. And that's what I like about morally gray characters in general. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And,
That's a really good point. Yeah.
and I hope that he will fail. I know that that's maybe harsh to say, but I don't want him to become a Gary Stu type of character. He's never been in that environment before. He's just like a normal guy. So if he would immediately feel at home there and not make a couple of mistakes, I would be very surprised. Of course, he does have Elsa by his side. So she's probably going to prep him for a couple of things. But towards the end of this book, you see that she told him which lines to say. And he felt a little bit awkward saying this, like he didn't really feel at home. So I hope that that's already some foreboding for the next book, showing you that he does make some mistakes. And I would love to see what happens then.
Yeah, I think we've only seen him in his wheelhouse up until this point. Like he went through terrible things in the war, but it still played to his strengths in a way. So, and then he came home and became a prince again of his home area. So I agree. Seeing him struggle might be a bit interesting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we also now have him not really living with his people anymore. And I don't know if that will also create a kind of grudge, because the entire time he was one of them. And if his area got targeted, he was there. He was in the middle of it. He got targeted as well. But now he's going to distance himself further. He's going to go to these special events. And I don't know what will happen to the loyalty. Because Bloody Anne is probably, she's his second. Is she going to then be in charge of all of the daily things that are happening? Are they going to see him on a daily basis? And what's going to happen then? Because we also have that rivalry between Bloody Anne and Jochen. So what's going to happen there? For now, it seems like he's under control, but we do see that there are times that you can't talk to him. And then Thomas is the one who can rein him in. But if Thomas is no longer around, will that create difficulties? I don't know.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I was thinking the same thing. Also, I was shocked at how easily everyone just accepted that he was going to move into this mansion. Like I felt like the end was wrapped up very quickly in that regard, because I feel like there would be a lot of resistance to the boss who has to be there for the day-to-day things, suddenly moving to a nicer part of town into a gigantic house. Like that doesn't really make any sense to not meet any resistance, especially when almost no one liked Elsa as well. So I felt the same way at the end. Like, is this going to be okay? Yeah.
Yeah, and exactly. It can show some character growth, and also how the relationship will change. Because the difference between him and the other people will be even bigger. And maybe he will get targeted more by the other gangs targeted him with violence. But now he's going to be in circles with a lot of power in different areas. So maybe they will target him that way. I would like to see it.
A battle of the wits or something. Kind of it reminds me of Lamora. Like, can he adjust to the upper echelons of society and not just the lower? It should be really interesting, I think. Yeah. I don't know. Steve, just remind me, you've read past this book, right? So I feel like when you're nodding... No. Oh, you haven't? Oh, okay. No. Okay, I thought you were nodding sagely in the corner, like, we'll see.
No, I'm hoping we see that. No, but I've been holding on to this for a while. I've been waiting for our group, so yeah.
Yeah, I think that it will open up more. Like, this was more an introduction of this is Thomas, this is his crew, and now the story is really starting. So I think that maybe a lot of issues is not really true, because I really did enjoy the book, but some of the things that I would like to see tweaked or done better just need to have some time. You need to have that build up and get to know all of these characters, and I think that this will happen maybe in the second book.
I agree with that. Yeah. Overall, though, I had a fun time.
Same.
I think.
I
Yeah.
I liked what he did with it and how different it was from other fantasy books, both in terms of setting as that mob boss, because I do know that you have that in Jade Legacy or the Greenbone Saga trilogy as well.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
from what I've heard from that, it feels more fantasy-esque than this one.
I would say the magic system, it's not even a magic system, but the magic aspect is more prevalent from the beginning. So I would say the actual setting, they're both, I would say the Jade City and the Greenbow Saga setting is more modern, actually, but the magic aspect is more prevalent. So kind of switched, whereas Priest of Bones was more historically set, but the magic is not a big, element in it yet. So, yeah.
Okay.
I
Interesting. Yeah.
also do before we go, something I really enjoyed about this is I'm just such a sucker for a tavern scene. And so the fact that the base was a tavern and they were all like always having ale or having a flirty bartender, I was like, I'm thriving, I'm a fan of that environment.
I've heard the same thing. Yeah. So I know that Patrick is a big fan of the series, and so the author decided to brutally kill him in the books, which is a nice twist. And I think that that's also just nice to read a book from like not extremely well-known authors, because you can have that interaction with them. Because I think Steve, if I'm not mistaken, the author will be on the live show of the fourth and final book with us.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
And that's just something that you will not be able to do when you're reading a book by Brandon Sanderson. So there's that.
Yeah.
That's super exciting.
If I was named after a character in a book and killed off, there's nowhere else to go from there. You're done. Like that's like the biggest honor. So
Right?
Exactly. So Esme is quite eager to read on. I think that all three of us are as well.
Yeah.
So just in general, I know, Taylor, you said that you gave it 3 stars.
Mm-hmm.
Steve, how much did you give it? And is it the same? I think so.
Yeah, I think I gave it 4 at the beginning the first time I read it. I think it was a good. I think it's a good introduction to grimdark. So I think it's a good dip your toes in, and you'll find out pretty quick if it's something a genre that you'll be interested in. But yeah, I think I'm right around the 4.5.
Okay.
It's a book I've thought about for a long time, and whenever a book sticks with me because of the themes and the trauma and the PTSD, and it had a lot of it's kept me thinking all this time. So I raised it up.
Taylor, do you have any like closing remarks? Because I think that we've said the most important things now.
Yeah. Well, just a disclaimer for 3 stars too, for people who don't follow my channel. 3 stars is not bad. So I just want to put that out there. So I know for some reviewers, it depends on how they review, but 3 to 4 or 4.5. I know Esme and I have similar tastes, so maybe that will be the case. Maybe it will bump up, the more that I think about it. But for me, that's generally a good book. So just in case if people aren't aware. But I would say closing remarks. This was a fun read. It's not fun themes, but it's been a long time since I could sit down and blow through something that I call grimdark that quickly, and it was just, like I said, compulsively readable, like I said at the beginning. So I had a good time with it overall, and I do think it has a lot of potential to grow and to expand, which I'm excited for. So overall, good vibes going out of this one.
Yeah, I think I have similar feelings. I'd probably give it like 3.5 with the potential to probably be better on a reread, because I think that the second half I liked actually more than the first half. And maybe, like said before, that is because you get to know Thomas better, so the first person works better in time. So I think that if I would reread it and know him already, I would probably enjoy the first half more than what I did on a first read. And just in general, I also agree with what Steve said, that it's a good introduction to grimdark, especially if you read darker books that are non-fantasy, because this is good for people who are new to fantasy, I think. There are a lot of things that you will recognize from our own world. The world building is not too vast, it's not too difficult. And overall, it's just a quick and, well, fun read, even though it's grimdark. But
I feel like we need to find another word besides fun, because both you and I have used it, but
exactly.
it's that vibe.
I always say like, well, this was enjoyable and this was fun, and then I'm thinking, well, with all of the themes that were in here, maybe I should say something else. But this was interesting.
What about you, Steve?
I agree. Yeah, I think it's a good introduction. I enjoyed it. Oh, again, you can say it. It was fun. I enjoyed it. But yeah, it's one that's got me thinking all this time, and I still think about it. Not all the time, but it's a book I keep coming back to. So I'm excited to read on with all of you.
Exactly. Same. I'm really excited to jump into the second book, and I think that it will be just as fast as the first one. At least that's my hope. So the perfect one to read in between bigger fantasy books. So I had a great time. Thanks for being here.
Yeah.
Both of you, also the people in the chat. And I hope that we will enjoy the second book just as much or even more.
Fingers crossed, right? Yeah. Ew. Like, we did not say that at the same time.
Thanks, everyone.
Geez.
And see you on the next one. Bye.
Bye.